Imagine standing outside on a cold winter night, hundreds of years ago. Snow is falling from a dark sky. The wind is biting at your nose and fingers. The ground is frozen hard as rock. Every pond in the village has turned to thick, solid ice. On top of a hill, there it stands, a massive stone castle. Its tall towers reach into the cloudy sky. Its thick walls look cold and gray and heavy. You might think that a building made entirely of stone would be the coldest place in the world on a night like this. You might picture the people inside shivering, teeth chattering, wrapped in every blanket they own, still unable to feel their toes. But here is the surprise. The people inside that castle are doing just fine. Yes, they are wearing warm clothes. Yes, they are gathered close together. But they are not freezing. Some of them are even comfortable. The great hall is warm enough to eat a big meal in. The Lord and his family are sitting by a roaring fire, perfectly content. The soldiers are grumbling about their duties, not about the cold. The kitchen is so warm from cooking fires that it feels almost like summer. How is this possible? How could a building made of stone, a material that feels ice cold to the touch, keep so many people warm through the most brutal winters of the Middle Ages? That is exactly the mystery we are going to solve today. And the answer is one of the most fascinating stories of clever human thinking you will ever hear. First, let's understand the enemy: winter in the Middle Ages. Before we talk about how castles stayed warm, we need to understand just how cold things could get back then. The Middle Ages lasted roughly from the year 500 to the year 1500. For much of that time, Europe and other parts of the world experienced some truly brutal winters. Historians tell us that there were long stretches of time, sometimes called Little Ice Ages, when winters were even colder than they are today. Rivers that never freeze anymore used to freeze over completely. Crops failed because of frost. Entire villages went hungry because the cold came early and stayed late. There was no central heating. There was no electricity. There were no gas furnaces humming quietly in a basement somewhere. There were no thermostats you could turn up with a click of a button. People in this era had only a few tools to fight the cold: fire, thick clothing, warm food, animals, and the buildings they lived in. For ordinary villagers, life was genuinely hard in winter. Their homes were small, often with just one room. The roof might have gaps. The walls might be thin. They slept huddled together with their farm animals for warmth, which sounds strange to us today, but was actually quite smart, because animals produce a lot of body heat. Castle dwellers, on the other hand, had something much better. They had a building that had been cleverly designed, sometimes without even realizing it, to capture, hold, and share heat in remarkably efficient ways. Let's look at each of those clever tricks one by one. Trick number 1. Those thick walls were actually insulation. Here is something that surprises most people when they first hear it. Stone walls feel cold. If you press your hand against a stone wall on a winter morning, it will feel freezing. So your instinct tells you that stone must be bad at keeping warmth in. But here is the thing about stone that most of us don't know. Stone is actually very good at storing heat. Scientists have a name for this quality. They call it thermal mass. Thermal mass is the ability of a material to absorb heat, hold it, and release it slowly over time. Think of it this way. You know how the beach sand feels burning hot in the afternoon, even after the sun has been hidden by clouds for a while? That is thermal mass. The sand absorbed all that sunlight and heat during the day, and it is slowly giving it back to you even when the sun is gone. Stone works the same way, just much better than sand. Castle walls in the Middle Ages were not thin. They were enormously, almost unbelievably thick. In many castles, the outer walls were between 8 and 12 feet thick. Some of the most famous fortresses had walls even thicker than that. These were not just for protection from arrows and siege weapons. That thickness also meant an enormous amount of stone and an enormous amount of thermal mass. During the day, Fires burned constantly inside the castle. People moved around. Animals were kept in some parts of the building. The kitchen fires blazed for hours. Candles and torches flickered in every room. All of that activity generated heat, and all of that heat was slowly, quietly being absorbed by those massive stone walls. Then, at night, when temperatures outside dropped sharply and the wind howled across the battlements, those walls began to give the stored heat back. Slowly, gently, steadily, the walls released warmth into the rooms, like a giant hot water bottle that had been quietly charging up all day. This process did not keep rooms toasty warm on its own, but it made an enormous difference. It meant that the temperature inside the castle never dropped as fast as the temperature outside. It acted as a buffer, a giant slow-releasing heater, working silently all through the night. Trick number 2, the ingenious fireplace. Of course, no castle could survive winter on thermal mass alone. You also needed fire, and castle builders in the Middle Ages became incredibly clever about how they used fire. The very first castles were built around a single large fire in the middle of the Great Hall. There was often a hole in the roof above it to let the smoke out. This worked, but it was smoky and inefficient, and a lot of the heat just drifted upward and escaped through the ceiling. Over time, builders figured out something better: the fireplace set into the wall, with a chimney going up through the stone. This sounds simple, but it was actually a brilliant piece of engineering. When you build a fireplace into a thick stone wall, several wonderful things happen at once. First, the fire is now able to burn much more strongly, because the chimney creates what engineers call a draft, a flow of air that feeds oxygen to the fire and carries smoke away efficiently. A fire with good airflow burns hotter and more completely. Second, the stone surrounding the fireplace absorbs a huge amount of heat from the fire. The walls on either side of the fireplace, the stone lintel above, the hearthstone below, they all become radiators, slowly giving heat back to the room long after the fire burns low. Third, the chimney itself passes through multiple floors of the castle as it rises toward the roof. At each floor, it can warm the room it passes through, simply by being a column of hot stone running through the building. Some clever builders added multiple fireplaces sharing a single chimney stack, like apartments sharing a central heating system. Great halls in famous castles often had fireplaces large enough to roast an entire ox inside. Some of the most spectacular fireplaces ever built are still standing today in castle ruins across Europe. You can walk up and stand inside them, and when you do, you realize just how serious these people were about staying warm. Trick number 3. Tapestries were not just decoration. If you have ever seen a picture of the inside of a medieval castle, you will almost certainly have noticed the large, colorful wall hangings. These are called tapestries, and they covered huge sections of the stone walls in the most important rooms. Most people assume tapestries were purely decorative, beautiful objects that showed off the wealth and taste of the lord and his family. And they were certainly that. Some tapestries told stories. Some showed hunting scenes or battles. Some displayed religious images. They were incredibly expensive and took skilled craftspeople years to create. But tapestries had a deeply practical purpose as well. Stone walls, for all their wonderful thermal mass, also have a tendency to feel drafty near the surface. Cold air can seep in through tiny cracks and joints. And even when no cold air is actually coming through, a cold stone surface will chill the air immediately next to it, creating a layer of cold air that drifts down along the wall and pools on the floor, making your feet cold even if the center of the room is relatively warm. Tapestries fixed both of these problems at once. By hanging a thick woven textile across the surface of the stone, you created a layer of trapped air between the fabric and the wall. This air layer acted as insulation. It blocked drafts. It prevented that cold wall effect. It kept the air in the room warmer and more consistent. At the same time, tapestries added color and beauty to what would otherwise be a gray, stark space. So they were doing two jobs at once, keeping everyone warmer and making the castle feel more like a home. Floors were also covered with thick rush mats or animal skins. Windows were hung with heavy curtains. Beds had curtains around them too. Those great four-poster beds with their heavy fabric draped on all four sides were not just fancy. They created a small, warm tent around the sleeping person, trapping body heat inside. Every surface that could be covered was covered. Every gap that could be blocked was blocked. The people of the Middle Ages understood insulation, even if they did not have a word for it. Trick number 4. The shape of the castle itself. Castle designers, many of whom were not trained architects in the way we think of today, but experienced builders who learned from those who came before them, gradually learned that the way you arranged rooms made a huge difference to how warm a building felt. One of the most important lessons was this: small rooms are easier to heat than large ones. The Great Hall was often the biggest room in the castle, and it was also the hardest to keep warm. Its ceiling was high, its floor was large, and it needed to hold many people for feasts and gatherings. Heating it required truly enormous fireplaces, sometimes 2 or 3 of them on opposite walls. Private rooms, bedchambers, and smaller sitting rooms were much easier to heat. A single fireplace in a small room with low ceilings could make it genuinely cozy. So the wealthier and more important you were, the more likely you were to spend your evenings in a smaller, warmer private chamber, rather than the grand but chilly Great Hall. Rooms were also often arranged so that warmer spaces were deep inside the building, protected on all sides by other rooms or thick walls. The coldest rooms were always those on the outer edges, exposed to the wind on 2 or 3 sides. The warm, sheltered rooms were in the center. Underground rooms and basements were particularly good at staying warm, because the temperature of the ground itself stays relatively constant even in deep winter, cool in summer, warmer than the air above in winter. Any room built partially or fully underground benefited from the earth's own stored heat. Root cellars, wine cellars, and storage rooms below the castle were never as cold as the rooms above. Towers, on the other hand, could be extremely cold. Exposed on all sides to the wind, with thin floors and ceilings, they offered little protection. Soldiers posted in towers on winter nights had a genuinely miserable time of it. Trick number 5. Constant human activity. Here is a trick that people often forget about because it seems too obvious. Bodies produce heat. A castle was not a quiet, empty building. In its busiest periods, a castle could house hundreds of people. There were the lord and his family. There were knights and soldiers, sometimes dozens of them. There were servants, cooks, cleaners, grooms, stable hands, seamstresses, blacksmiths, bakers, and brewers. There were visiting guests. There were animals, horses in the stables, dogs in the Great Hall, sometimes livestock being kept safe through winter. Every single one of those living beings produced body heat, 24 hours a day. A human body at rest produces about as much heat as a small candle. But there were many, many human bodies in a castle, all working hard, eating well, moving around, cooking, fighting, dancing, cleaning. A large castle during a winter evening with a feast underway, fires blazing, candles lit, dozens of people eating and talking, would have generated a remarkable amount of warmth. The kitchen was the warmest place of all, with multiple fires burning for most of the day, large pots constantly boiling, ovens blazing, and a team of sweating cooks working hard. The castle kitchen could be almost unbearably hot even on the coldest days of the year, and that heat spread through the walls and floors into nearby rooms. This is why kitchens were sometimes deliberately placed in the lower floors, or in positions where the warm air rising from them could help heat rooms above. Trick number 6. The clever use of geography and position. Castle builders were not just builders. They were also, in a very real sense, scientists, careful observers of nature who learned from experience which locations were better than others. Many castles were built on hills. This was primarily for military reasons. Higher ground gives you a better view and makes it harder for enemies to attack. But high ground also has another advantage. It is often drier. Dampness makes cold feel much worse. A damp, cold room at the bottom of a valley feels far colder than a dry, cold room on a hilltop, even if both are the same temperature. South-facing slopes and south-facing windows were understood to be warmer and brighter. Rooms built on the south side of a castle received more sunlight during the short winter days. And sunlight, even weak winter sunlight, can make a real difference to the temperature of a room. Forest cover nearby could block harsh winter winds. Castle gardens and courtyards, surrounded by thick walls, created sheltered microclimates, little pockets of calm, protected air that were noticeably warmer than the exposed countryside around them. Experienced builders would have observed, over many years and many buildings, which positions worked best. They passed this knowledge down, not always in writing, but through the apprenticeship system, young builders learning from old masters, absorbing decades of practical wisdom about how buildings and weather interacted. Trick number 7. Smart clothing and hot food. No discussion of how people stayed warm in medieval castles would be complete without talking about what people wore and what they ate. Medieval clothing for wealthy people was genuinely excellent at keeping warm. Wool, in particular, is one of nature's finest insulating materials. It is remarkable stuff. It can keep you warm even when it gets wet, which is almost unique among natural fibers. Woolen tunics, cloaks, stockings, and hats were standard wear for anyone who could afford them. Wealthier lords and ladies wore fur-lined garments. Fur from animals like beaver, squirrel, rabbit, and fox was sewn into coats and cloaks as lining or trim. The air trapped in fur is one of the best natural insulators in existence. It is basically the same principle as modern down jackets, where millions of tiny air pockets keep warmth close to the body. Layers were the key. You would wear a thin linen shirt directly against your skin. Over that, a woolen tunic. Over that, a heavier outer garment. Over that, a thick cloak. Each layer traps a pocket of still air, and still air is a terrible conductor of cold, meaning cold could not easily get through to your body. Hot food and drink made a huge difference as well. Medieval people ate hot porridge in the morning. They drank hot spiced ale and warm cider. Soups and stews simmered on the fire for hours and were served piping hot. Eating and drinking hot things raises your core body temperature and keeps you warm from the inside out. Spices like ginger, pepper, and cinnamon were believed, correctly, as it turns out, to warm the body from within. Mulled wine, heated with spices, was a winter staple in wealthy households. The castle kitchen was not just feeding people's hunger. It was part of the whole system of keeping everyone alive and comfortable through the winter. What about the poor people in the castle? Here is an honest and important question. Was everyone in the castle equally warm? The answer is no. The lord and his family enjoyed the best rooms, smaller, more private chambers, close to the best fireplaces, with the finest tapestries and the most elaborate beds. They wore the finest clothes and ate the richest food. Soldiers and servants were far less comfortable. Many of them slept in the great hall, on rush mats on the stone floor, in their cloaks, huddled close together. They would have been cold, not dangerously cold most of the time, but cold enough to be uncomfortable. Outside workers, stable hands, guards posted at the gates, those who tended the castle's outer walls, faced the worst conditions. On a night when snow was falling and the wind was fierce, standing watch on top of a stone tower in a woolen cloak was genuinely miserable and genuinely dangerous. Cases of frostbite and winter illness were not uncommon among those who worked outside, but even the poorest person inside the castle walls was generally better off than peasants in the village below. The combination of thick stone walls, multiple fires, the warmth of many bodies, and shared food and drink meant that life inside a castle, even for a servant, was considerably more survivable in winter than life in a single-room thatched cottage with a smoking fire and bare earth floor. A day in the winter life of a castle. Let us bring all of this together by imagining a single winter day in a large castle, sometime around the year 1200. Dawn is gray and cold. Outside, frost sparkles on every surface. The guards who have been on night watch stamp their feet and blow into their hands as they wait to be relieved. Inside, the kitchen fires have already been going for an hour. The head cook and his assistants are stirring a vast pot of porridge, baking bread in the stone oven, and heating water for the Lord's morning wash. The kitchen is warm and smells wonderful. In the great hall, servants are sweeping the rush matting and laying fresh wood on the two large fireplaces. The tapestries on the walls hold in the warmth from the night before. The stone walls, having stored heat from yesterday, release it steadily. The Lord and his wife wake in their chamber. Their four-poster bed, with its heavy curtains drawn all night, has kept them warm. Their room has its own small fireplace, which has been burning low all night and is now stoked by a servant. Within minutes, the room is comfortable. The great hall fills gradually with life. Dogs shake themselves awake. Knights arrive for breakfast, bringing noise and laughter and the heat of their bodies. Food is served, hot porridge, fresh bread, warm ale. The fireplaces roar, 60 or 70 people in a large room, all eating hot food, all generating body heat. Outside, snow begins to fall, but inside the thick stone walls, life continues. Work is done, lessons are taught, disputes are settled, music is played. The smell of cooking fills the corridors. The walls hold the warmth. The fires do their work. By evening, the great hall is at its warmest. A feast is underway. Hundreds of candles add their small flames to the warmth of the two great fireplaces. The room is loud and bright and warm. Dogs lie under the tables. Children chase each other between the legs of adults. The cold outside seems very far away. That night, as the fires burn low, the stone walls slowly give back all the heat they have stored. Morning comes cold, but not unbearable, and the whole cycle begins again. Medieval castle builders never read a book about thermal dynamics. They never took a course in insulation science. They never had a computer model to test their designs. But through centuries of observation, trial and error, and the slow passing of knowledge from builder to builder, they created buildings that worked with nature rather than against it. They understood, in a practical, lived-in way, how to use stone, shape, fire, fabric, and human activity together to create warmth. Many of the principles they used are still relevant today. Modern architects and engineers who design energy-efficient homes talk about thermal mass. They talk about insulation layers and trapped air. They talk about passive solar design, using the sun's warmth through smart positioning of windows. They talk about heat generated by the activity of the people inside a building. In every one of these conversations, they are rediscovering ideas that a master castle builder in the year 1100 already understood perfectly well. When you look at a ruined castle today, those ancient gray stones standing in an open field, cold and silent and exposed to every wind, it is easy to think of it as a cold, harsh place. And in some ways it was. Life in the Middle Ages was not easy. Winters were hard. Not everyone stayed warm enough. But those stones were once alive with fire and human warmth. Children played in those halls. Families ate together in those rooms. Generations were born, grew up, and grew old inside those walls. And through all the hard winters that came and went, those remarkable buildings, designed with more cleverness than they often get credit for, helped keep those people alive. The next time you press your hand against a cold stone wall and pull away shivering, pause for a moment. Think about what that stone is doing quietly, invisibly, all day long. It is waiting, storing, getting ready to give the warmth back, just as it has been doing, without complaint, for 1,000 years.